Hi, good morning. Dobro
Hi,
jutro.
it's 3 a.m. there, so
It
sorry
is
to.
3 a.m.
You can say safely to your friends tomorrow. I pulled an all-nighter, like when you were a student, right?
Yeah, that's
So,
right.
so thank you for being with us. I made a short intro about you, and you can start the presentation, so they will really get the feeling what the books you wrote are really about. Okay?
Sorry, do you want me to start?
Yeah, start
Yep.
please, and share
Ready
the
to go?
screen.
And I want to make sure everybody can see the right screen because
Yes, we
sometimes this
can.
doesn't work. You can
Yeah,
see it.
it's perfect.
Very good. Thank you.
I just want to add that Paul told me that he has a lot of beautiful animations in the slides, but since he needs to share the PDF, imagine the animations. Paul, to you.
Imagine the animations. Very good. Thank you. I want to thank you. Thank you, Milena. Thank you, everybody at IDC. Thank you, Nevena. Thank you, Irina, for inviting me. I had a lot of Serbian friends in university, and I actually picked up some of the language from them. Not anything that I could repeat in a business conference. And I actually attended a Serbian wedding when I was 18 years old. I still remember dancing with the 80-year-old Serbian woman. There's a part of the United States in Wisconsin, Milwaukee, that's very, very Serbo-Croat. It was Yugoslavia then, so I got a little introduction to your culture. I really found it a very warm and very fun people. So let me start a little bit about the things that I think we're going to talk about today. The context for it is, of course, digital transformation and why that's different and why the methods you use to lead change have to be different. And I just want to start with the hypothesis, if you will, that if you lead digital transformation with analog change methods, you risk looking really stupid. However, change management methodologies in the United States and around the world, the ones I sample, the conferences I go to, are still really, really analog. They still rely on old-fashioned, pre-digital methods of communicating, engaging, persuading, and changing behaviors. So what I'd like to talk about is some of the differences for digital age change management, some methods for changing behaviors, and some methods for dealing with resistance to change. Each of those is a book-length topic, and I'm going to try and do it all in 20 minutes. So we live in the information age, but what's called information disease or information disorder is part of what we need to deal with. There's more information today. Someone wrote in a scholarly publication that we consume the equivalent of 174 newspapers in a day of information of various kinds. It moves faster. And it's an interesting thing when you think about change, because matter, ships, boats, oil, physical materials, move about the same speed within an order of magnitude as it did 100 years ago. But information moves 10 to the 10th, 10 to the 12th times faster. The internet and the digital age was supposed to make us more clever and more connected, but partly because of misinformation, fake news, conspiracy theories, and pseudoscience, that's a really mixed bag. And the problem becomes not volume information. It's not that your listeners, your audience, your target market, the people you want to change in your organization, it's not that they have too little information. It's that they got a huge volume of information. They're deluged with information, and some of it is of poor quality. The two things I want to emphasize today are mono to multimedia and from one to many communication styles. I still get now, even in a sophisticated world, about 400 to 500 text emails a day. And what we know for a fact is that people prefer video. And still, so few chief executives, so few change leaders, so few change agents take the trouble to make a 90-second video or a 3-minute video, which can be shared on various people's platforms. I'll come to that later, in order to engage people. And it's much more engaging. It's much more personal. It's much more fun. You can use graphics creatively. You can use backgrounds creatively. And so that's something that we need to think about, is that it's not just the old school methods of digital, of analog communication that we need to worry about. We need to worry about having a broader kind of media to engage people. And so what's also happened in the information age is that the people who were once a passive audience, where we could broadcast change messages, now think of themselves as prosumers. 54% of people in the United States get their news from social media platforms. When you're sharing on LinkedIn or on Facebook or wherever you share, you're not just a consumer anymore of information, you're also a producer of content. And we can either say, oh, you know, I'm competing with all these different platforms or something like that, or we can try and use that human desire to share and to knowledgeable and to share exciting things and to have a more networked model. The old model on the right was one that persisted in the 1990s and in the 2000s, is the change leader or the change agent at the center of a hub and spoke, disseminating messages to try and persuade people. And of course, that's limited. The human brain isn't that much bigger relative to the size of our bodies than in any other primate. But one of the things that is different about the human brain is the connectivity. There are 10 to the 15th connections in the human brain. And if we can make use of that kind of network connectivity for disseminating change messages, we can multiply their effects. But that means we have to make content that people want to share. And so the old methods of communicating were what I call episodic, is that we would have a workshop, or we'd have a training course, or we'd have a poster, or we'd have some sort of engagement event, or we'd send an email to communicate change. The change leader and the change agent's job was to do things like this. And I spent 2 decades doing stuff like this, right? This is the sort of way I made my money for 2 decades. But now we have the opportunity to engage people constantly. We can talk to them all the time. And one of the websites that I use for my author publishing platform has a Slack channel for customers, so that customers can engage with members of the development community constantly. So you have this cycle of user feedback that's constant, and engagement is constant. And so if you can do that, and you have to be creative, because the books on this aren't really written yet. This is, brand new stuff for leading change. But if you can create a platform where the change you're leading is constantly discussed, where people are constantly sharing content with one another, where they're constantly commenting and give you feedback, not only have you engaged them constantly, not just the workshop, which they forget 20 minutes when they're on their way home, but if you can do that, you create real engagement using the tools of today and using them creatively. So those are some things that we want to think about. The other thing we want to think about is having communications pulled towards people. People are naturally curious. They want to know what's going on. But too often, the change leaders of yesterday were thinking about, how do I push my message out to the sheep who are out there who need to know the benefit of my enormous wisdom. But what we need to do is we can create our change communication so people are pulling them towards them with curiosity and then sharing them. We create the possibility of really having dynamic content. And those are 2 of the most shared memes from our age. I'm going to talk a little bit about behavioral science, but first we have to return to Dilbert and some of the change management challenges that Dilbert presents to us are, he's always really very, very insightful. So here's the problem. Just communication alone does not change behavior. Now, nobody really thinks it does, but everyone behaves as if it does. We know that when you endorse a 2-step model of persuasion or education or engagement, the model you have, the mental model you have, is that you change people's hearts and minds, and then their behaviors follow. So you persuade them of the benefit of your product or of your new system or of your new technology, and then their behaviors will just align like in a magnetic field. And if that never happens, it never happens in real life. There's data from medical science, which is, I always ask people to guess if this was a live workshop, what percentage of people who've received the real message of a heart attack changed their behavior. There's an emotional context and there's an intellectual context. They know they have to change their smoking and diet behavior. They know they have to exercise more, but yet that alone doesn't produce any change in the world. 95% of people who are obese, I live in a country that's the most obese in the world, want to lose weight. Only 5% of those people who say they want to lose weight do so in a year, lose 10% of the body weight during a year. Communication doesn't change behavior. We need to think about doing more than changing hearts and minds, more than a training course, more than the messages. And so the technique from behavioral science are really fun and they can be put to use. And again, the book on this, well, I've written a book on it, but the precise ways that you can use it require a lot of creativity about being specific about the behaviors you need to see, and then creating timely nudges, such as this one, which can help people change behaviors. You can make nudging fun. This was a great slide build, but there are lots of creative ways in public policy that we can use behavioral science to produce dramatic changes. And here's an example: organ donation. The difference between the countries in red and the countries in green is simply one box on a form: opt-in or opt-out. And if you think about it, the difference in engagement between roughly 20% and roughly 90%, those are the kind of things you'd die for as a change leader. You'd kill to transform the experience of engaging and producing behavioral change or adoption of a new system from 20% to 90%. Yet this is one box, and that's the power of behavioral science. And here's another intervention from behavioral science. My electricity company sends me a letter every month comparing my energy usage with that of my neighbors. And if you do this, you produce an 8% reduction in home energy use. So you think, okay, what's the big deal, right? My electricity bill goes from $100 to $92. Who cares? Multiplied by a population, that's an awful lot of carbon savings. Multiplied this by the size of the energy market. And again, from some, an 8% increase, if you think about it from the percent of view as a marketing person or as a salesperson or something like that, those are the sorts of very low tech, cleverly designed things that can change behaviors. And so still, a lot of change leaders and a lot of change managers just really aren't thinking about the behavioral component of what they want to achieve. So from behavioral science, we're going to talk about trust and resistance. Again, we're going to visit Dilbert, because one of the things certainly that we need to worry about is trust. So how do we build that, and how do we destroy it? And what I say is that resistance to change, trust is the resistance anti-venom. I'm going to give you an example. So if you're highly trusted by the people who you would want to lead through a particular change, you can get away with quite a lot. You can get away with challenging messages. You can get away with messages that are going to be difficult for you. You can get away with messages like, I'm going to ask more of you than I ever have before. You can do things like that if you're highly trusted. If you're not trusted, even if you're trying to do good things for them, and I remember working with the chief executive who was trying to give away options in his privately held company to staff in order to engage them. He had a big trust issue. And he says, well, I'll give them part of the company. That was viewed with suspicion. He was actually literally trying to line their pockets financially, and still they worried about his motives because trust was low. So when trust is low, you can get away with almost nothing at all. You have to use coercion, which of course lowers trust further. And so what are some of the behaviors we see? Well, one of them is that perceived self-interest is one of the fastest ways to kill trust. Empathy, on the other hand, is really caring about people, not pretending that you're caring about people or saying that you care about people, but behaviorally caring about people will build trust. Having hidden agendas, there are limits sometimes to transparency in the workforce. We sometimes have to play some of our cards holder to our chest, but too often that's used as an excuse for not really being straight up with people about what is going on. And it happened in coronavirus in the United States. That's why the United States is the world's sick child, the worst in the world, you know, among the developed countries and by many measures, is because there was not that initial transparency. The leaders of the country, the scientists, they all knew what was going on. They knew what was going on in February. They knew how bad it could get. But they thought, well, we don't want to have a public panic. So what we'll do is we'll pretend otherwise. We'll pretend we have this under control, and we pretend everything's okay, and we'll pretend that the science is still emerging. And of course, you know, we have disasters we've seen in front of us. You need consistency of your measures. You need authenticity. Authenticity is a misunderstood word. You know, some people mistake it as just me vomiting out whatever happens to come up. That's really seen as authentic, and that's childlike. It's an authenticity ought to be in alignment of my highest and best and most noble intentions with my behavior, an integrity of what I think, what I say, and what I do. And then, of course, there's dishonesty and consistency of messaging. And I was trying to think of a political leader to put on the right who would be uncontroversial. I couldn't think of one. It was kind of funny. It's easy to find bad examples in the world of leaders of trust, but I was trying to think, well, is there a European leader, or is there a leader in the only one I could think of was like Nelson Mandela. Anyway, so I put Jean-Luc Picard as a thing. So those are the three really takeaways that I want to say. The information age that we live in, an information disorder, and how you have to modify how you communicate. That communication by itself isn't really enough, that you need to think about behavioral change and use behavioral science in your work. And then finally, the importance of trust, because in a high trust environment, resistance to change is much, much lessened. And in a low trust environment, you know, you're really out of luck. You're going to find that everything you try to do is resisted in some respect or another, and sometimes for good reasons. And so I write about this stuff. The Science of Organizational Change is on behavioral science. The book Impact is on the digital age communication and digital age change management. And then in about 3 weeks, I've written a book I'm very proud of. It's my masterpiece to date. It's called Spirituality of Work and Leadership. And even in here's between you and me, it's got a very humanistic perspective, very secular, very universal perspective. I try to write a book that sits above world religions and new age religions and thinks about eternal human values and their importance to organizations today: meaning, purpose, engagement, flourishing, happiness at work, vocation choice. I've been trying to, in a sense, bring wisdom writings into understanding those very human phenomenon today. And it's part of a book series called the Humanizing Business Series. And please connect with me on my website, on LinkedIn. I have a podcast, which is not very business focused. I've got the Minister for Climate Change from New Zealand. I've got famous economists. I talk about CRISPR. So Think Bigger, Think Better podcast is something I'm very proud of. And the only thing I don't do is TikTok, and I don't pretend to understand TikTok. So anyway, that's it for me today. I want to thank you once again, folks at IDC, for inviting me, even at 3 o'clock in the morning, to come and talk to you guys.
Okay, thanks, Paul, so much for being with us, especially for getting up so early, because people, what they usually do is record these presentations. But I think it's great that Paul, took the time, got up, listened to other speakers, got in the groove with everything we've been talking about.
Yeah, thanks
so
once again.
Thanks.